The message on Emma's phone was chilling, but it wasn't unexpected. Derek Pierce had been carefully building his empire for years, and now that the walls were closing in, he would stop at nothing to protect it. Emma wasted no time, her hands flying over the control panel of the warehouse's operations center. "They're making their move," she muttered under her breath. "We need to move fast or we'll lose our shot." Mark and Sarah were still reeling from the discovery. They had suspected that Pierce was part of something bigger, but hearing it from Emma confirmed the worst of their fears. This wasn't just about the disappearances or the false identities. This was about the manipulation of power on a global scale. "Where do we go from here?" Sarah asked, her voice full of urgency. Emma looked up from the monitors, her eyes steely with determination. "We take the fight to them. We've tracked Pierce to a warehouse in the city, his last known hideout. It's where all his operations come together. If we can infiltrate it, we can bring down everything." Mark's eyes narrowed. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Everything," Emma replied. "We need evidence of the syndicate's connections, the money laundering operations, anything that links Pierce to the higher-ups. This is our chance to hit him where it hurts." The clock was ticking. Sarah, Mark, and Emma quickly suited up in tactical gear. They weren't just walking into a warehouse, they were walking into the lion's den. Every step they took would bring them closer to the heart of Pierce's operation, and they didn't know who they could trust anymore. As they approached the warehouse, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The closer they got, the more intense the tension in the air seemed. Emma had briefed them on the plan, but they didn't have all the details. They knew they were up against the clock, but they also knew they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. As they neared the entrance, Emma stopped and turned to them. "We're not alone in this," she said. "Pierce has informants everywhere. We need to move quickly and stay focused." With that, they pushed forward, creeping silently toward the door. They had to get in and out without anyone noticing. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside. The warehouse was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the hum of the machinery and the occasional clink of metal. They moved with precision, sticking to the shadows. Then, without warning, the lights flickered on. The sound of footsteps echoed through the vast space. "Move!" Emma shouted. They darted into an adjoining room just as the first group of armed guards appeared. "Stay low, stay quiet," Emma whispered. But it wasn't just the guards that they had to worry about. There were eyes everywhere. This was the heart of Pierce's operation, and it was crawling with people who would do anything to protect him. Suddenly, a voice crackled over the intercom. "We know you're here. You're wasting your time." Mark froze. The voice was unmistakable, Derek Pierce. "Get to the central hub." Emma shouted. "We need to access the mainframe. That's where the records are." But as they moved deeper into the warehouse, things took a turn for the worse. They had been spotted. A group of Pierce's enforcers was already moving in on their position. The situation had escalated quickly. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that they had been made. Pierce knew they were here, and now there was no turning back. The enforcers were closing in, and Sarah could hear the sound of their heavy boots pounding on the concrete floor. "We're surrounded," she whispered, her breath shallow with fear. "Get down," Emma commanded. The three of them took cover behind a stack of crates, crouching low to avoid being seen. Emma's eyes scanned the area, calculating their next move. She was calm, but Sarah could see the tension in her shoulders. They were in enemy territory now, and the clock was ticking. "Mark, Sarah," Emma said, her voice steady. "We need to split up. I'll take the west wing, you two head for the mainframe. We can't afford to be caught in the open." Mark hesitated. "You're not going alone." "I've got this," Emma said. "You two are the key to bringing Pierce down. Just get to the mainframe, and don't stop until you have what you need." Before either of them could protest, Emma darted off, disappearing into the shadows of the warehouse. Mark turned to Sarah. "Stay close. We stick to the plan." The air was thick with tension as they moved through the maze of crates and equipment. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Sarah's heart raced in her chest. This wasn't just a mission, it was a life-or-death struggle. They rounded a corner and saw the entrance to the control room ahead. It was guarded, but Sarah knew they had to act fast. Mark glanced at her, his eyes locked in determination. "Ready?" Sarah nodded, her hand gripping the gun tightly. "Ready." They sprinted toward the door, ducking behind another stack of crates as the guards turned their heads. The seconds felt like hours as they waited for the right moment to strike. Finally, Mark gave the signal. They burst from their hiding place, catching the guards off guard. Sarah fired a few warning shots, and the guards scrambled for cover. "Go, go, go!" Mark shouted. They reached the control room, kicking the door open with force. Sarah rushed inside, her heart pounding in her ears. The mainframe was in sight, but there was still one obstacle left, a heavy steel door. "This is it," Mark said, pressing a button on the console. "We need the codes." Sarah's eyes widened in panic. "We don't have them." Mark's hands were shaking, but he managed to force the door open. The computers inside were locked, but the keys were there. They had the information they needed. It was only a matter of time now. But just as Mark and Sarah began to download the files, the lights went out. A soft voice came through the intercom again. "You should have stayed out of this." A moment of stillness, then the unmistakable sound of the door slamming shut. The world seemed to freeze as the lights flickered off and on again. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as the shadows around her deepened, and her pulse quickened. Mark's face was hard with concentration, but even he couldn't hide the underlying tension. "Emma?" Mark called out, his voice edged with urgency. No response. Sarah's hand clenched around the gun, ready for anything. She felt her heart racing in her chest as she glanced nervously at the doorway. Whoever had cut the lights must have been close, far too close. A soft hum of machinery in the background did little to ease her nerves. The mainframe that had once seemed like their ticket to bringing down Pierce now felt like a trap, like they were walking deeper into the lion's den. And then it happened. A figure darted into the room. Too fast. Too silent. Before Sarah could react, she saw the silhouette. A glint of a familiar face, and then the unmistakable click of a weapon being aimed. Her stomach twisted. "Don't move," a cold voice ordered. It was Derek Pierce. Derek Pierce stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light from the hallway. His expression was calm, almost bored, but Sarah could see the anger simmering behind his eyes. It was the kind of look that sent chills down her spine. A man who thought he was untouchable. "You two think you can take me down?" Pierce scoffed. "You're playing a dangerous game." Sarah's gun remained aimed at his chest, but her hands were trembling. She glanced at Mark, whose jaw was clenched, his eyes narrowed in frustration. They hadn't expected this. They thought they had caught him off guard, but it seemed the tables had turned. "Where is Emma?" Mark demanded, stepping forward. "Where's the rest of the team?" Pierce's lips curled into a smirk. "She's elsewhere. And you too. Well, you've been a thorn in my side long enough." Sarah's heart dropped. There was something off about the way he was speaking. He wasn't here just to threaten them, he was playing with them. The realization hit her hard. Pierce had known they were coming. He had been ready for this confrontation from the start. "Think you can just walk in here and expect to bring me down?" Pierce continued, his voice dripping with venom. "You've underestimated me. And it's going to cost you." Before Sarah could react, he moved quickly, lunging toward her with a brutal speed she hadn't expected. The gun went off, but not before Pierce knocked it from her hand. The weapon skidded across the floor, leaving her defenseless. In the blink of an eye, Pierce had Mark pinned against the wall, his forearm pressing down on Mark's throat. Sarah's heart pounded as she struggled to regain her footing. The scene felt surreal, nothing like what she had imagined. She had expected a battle of wits, not a physical confrontation. "Mark!" she shouted, her voice desperate. "Shut up!" Pierce barked, tightening his grip. "This ends now." But just as quickly as it had begun, Pierce was thrown off. Emma appeared from the shadows, her movements swift and calculated. She had a gun in her hand, and the barrel was aimed directly at Pierce's chest. "Let him go," Emma said, her voice steady. "Now." Pierce, caught off guard by Emma's sudden reappearance, hesitated. His face twisted with a mix of shock and anger, but Emma didn't flinch. She had no time to waste on games. She'd been tracking Pierce for too long to let him slip away now. Pierce began, but Emma didn't give him the chance to finish. You've been using people as pawns in your game, Derek? Emma shot back, her eyes never leaving him. You don't get to control this anymore. Mark gasped for air, his hands clutching at his throat as Emma pulled him free from Pierce's grasp. He stumbled backward, his body still reeling from the attack. You've been using the system, manipulating innocent people, and yet you think you can come out on top? Emma's voice was cold, unforgiving. Pierce smiled, but it wasn't a smile of defeat, it was one of arrogance. You think you're the first one to try and stop me? You've got nothing on me. Your little investigation? It's just a distraction. People like me? We're always 3 steps ahead. Emma took a slow, deliberate step toward him. Maybe you've been ahead, but we're catching up. And this time, it's over. Your empire ends tonight. Mark's eyes flickered with realization. Emma, He stopped himself, unable to process everything happening at once. The shock, the anger, the fear, it was overwhelming. Emma turned her attention to him for a split second before turning back to Pierce. I've got this under control, she said, her voice firm. We've waited long enough for this moment. But there was something else that lingered in the air. A nagging thought. Mark couldn't place it at first, but it kept gnawing at the back of his mind. Emma, you were one of his insiders, he said quietly, his voice filled with a suspicion that had been building for a while. Were you? Emma's eyes snapped to his. For the first time in this entire investigation, Mark saw a flicker of uncertainty pass through her expression. But it was gone before it could take root. No, Emma said sharply. I was never part of this. I just needed to know the truth. But Mark wasn't convinced. There was something off about her response, something that didn't sit right with him. He didn't have the time to probe further. Pierce's attention was already back on them. Pierce, seeing the crack in their resolve, smiled again. You two think you've won? You think I'll just go down quietly? Emma's grip tightened on the gun. You'll never hurt anyone again, Derek. You're done. And yet, as Mark stood there, watching the unfolding drama, he couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was hiding something that could change everything. Just as Emma moved forward to take the shot, the lights flickered again, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the distance. A shadow appeared on the horizon. Get ready, Pierce sneered. You're not done with me yet. The room was plunged into darkness once more, and Sarah's heart raced in her chest as her eyes darted frantically. The faint sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing in the empty room. Her fingers tightened around the cold grip of the gun in her hand. Emma's face was tense as she peered around, trying to make sense of the new threat. You two think you've got everything under control, Pierce taunted from the corner. His voice had shifted, darker, more confident. But there's a reason you never see the full picture. Suddenly, the lights flared back on. Blinding, disorienting, but just in time for Sarah to see what was coming. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, a familiar face, but not one they had expected. Sarah's stomach dropped. It was Victor, the man who had been part of their investigation team. His eyes were cold, his expression unreadable. Victor! Sarah gasped, taking a step back. What are you doing here? Victor's lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. You thought you had everything figured out, didn't you? He said smoothly, his voice filled with contempt. That's always your problem. Mark's gaze snapped to Victor, realization dawning. You were part of this all along, weren't you? Victor nodded, a small chuckle escaping his lips. I had to be, didn't I? How else would I have had access to the things you've been working so hard to expose? Emma stepped forward, her face a mix of disbelief and fury. You were working with him? You sold us out. Victor's gaze met hers, and for the first time, there was a flicker of guilt, but it was quickly masked by his usual indifference. I didn't sell anyone out. I just knew which side to choose. But you didn't just work with him. You've been the one pulling the strings, Sarah said, the words barely a whisper as the realization hit her. You've been feeding Pierce information all along. Victor shrugged nonchalantly. What can I say? I've got my reasons. You all think you're the heroes in this story. But the truth is, there's no such thing. Not when everyone's playing the same game. Mark, still holding his ground, clenched his fists. You betrayed us, Victor. You betrayed everyone. Victor's eyes glinted with something far more dangerous than mere contempt. Everyone is always so quick to judge. The question is, who's really the enemy here? The tension in the room was suffocating. Sarah, Emma, and Mark stood in the center, facing the man who had been feeding them false hope, only to betray them in the end. Pierce, though still a threat, seemed almost secondary in the face of Victor's sudden revelation. Victor stepped closer, his posture unyielding, his presence heavy in the room. You've been chasing shadows. All this time, thinking you could tear down Pierce's empire, but there's something bigger than that, something you don't even know about. What the hell are you talking about? Mark demanded. Victor smiled as if savoring their confusion. Let's just say that Pierce is a pawn in a much larger game. You've been wasting your time. Sarah's mind spun. A pawn? But you've been helping him. Victor nodded. But not in the way you think. The truth is, I've been helping him build something far bigger than just a simple criminal empire. You think exposing Pierce is the end of the story? It's just the beginning. Sarah and Emma exchanged glances. They had been so sure they were close to the truth. They had thought Pierce was the mastermind, the one pulling all the strings. But now Victor's words threatened to undo everything they thought they knew. You've been part of a much larger conspiracy, Emma said, her voice trembling with disbelief. Who's behind it, Victor? Who's really pulling the strings? Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped back, his expression almost pitying. You'll learn soon enough, he said cryptically. But for now, you should know something else. What? Mark snapped. Pierce isn't the only one who's been playing you, Victor said, his voice colder now, calculating. You've been playing right into the hands of the people you trust most. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Who could he be talking about? Before she could ask another question, the door slammed open. A man in a dark suit entered, followed by several others in matching uniforms. They were heavily armed, their faces obscured by masks. Pierce's expression shifted from smug confidence to something more guarded as he stood taller, seemingly energized by the new arrivals. What's going on? Sarah demanded, her hands still gripping her weapon, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Victor turned, his gaze cold as he watched the new arrivals. It's over, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. You've already lost. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the chaos unfolding in front of her. The group of men were clearly well trained, but their sudden appearance only deepened the mystery. Who were they working for? And what did it all mean for Pierce's operation? The new man, who appeared to be in charge, looked straight at Pierce. We've been waiting for this moment, he said, his voice eerily calm. You've outlived your usefulness. Pierce's face tightened, but there was no sign of fear. Instead, his eyes gleamed with defiance. You don't know who you're dealing with. Oh, we know exactly who we're dealing with, the man replied. And you're done. Sarah's heart raced as she realized they were watching the end of something much bigger than they had imagined. Pierce, it seemed, was no longer the top dog. Victor, as if sensing the shift in power, turned to Sarah. You've been chasing the wrong villain all this time. The man in charge stepped forward. We're not here to kill you, Pierce, he said coldly. We're here to take you out of the picture, for good. Pierce's eyes widened in recognition. No, you can't do this to me. The man smiled faintly. It's already done. As the armed men moved toward Pierce, Sarah's thoughts raced. What had they walked into? Who were these people, and why were they so much more powerful than Pierce's entire empire? The real question was, who was really behind all of this? And how were they connected to Victor? The story was far from over. The air in the room was thick with anticipation as Sarah, Emma, and Mark stood frozen, watching the spectacle unfold before them. Pierce, the man they had all been chasing, stood at the mercy of the group of masked men who had just entered. But as the realization dawned on Sarah, she felt her stomach twist. The question that had been lingering in her mind for weeks was finally coming to the surface. Who was really behind all of this? The man in charge of the masked group took a few deliberate steps toward Pierce, who was now visibly trembling. It was clear that the once confident crime lord was no longer in control of his empire. His smirk had vanished, replaced with a look of genuine fear. "You thought you were the one pulling all the strings, didn't you?" the man said, his voice cold and almost mocking. Pierce didn't answer. His jaw clenched tightly, and he stood still, as if calculating his next move. But the more Sarah observed, the clearer it became. Pierce was no longer the mastermind. He was just another pawn. "I'll never work for you," Pierce growled, but there was a lack of conviction in his voice. He knew deep down that he had lost. The man smirked. "You're not in a position to make demands. You'll be lucky if we don't end your life here today." Sarah, still trying to wrap her head around everything, was struggling to make sense of the bigger picture. Just when she thought she understood the game they were all playing, the rules shifted again. The entire operation, everything they had been working on, was much bigger than they realized. And there was someone else pulling the strings. The man in charge turned to Victor, who had been eerily quiet throughout the entire exchange. "You knew it was him all along, didn't you?" the man asked, his voice filled with accusation. "You've been playing your own game." Victor, looking more resigned than anything else, finally spoke. "Yes. I've been working for him." He gestured toward the man leading the group. "This is the real mastermind." The truth hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. The person standing before them, the one who had orchestrated it all, was someone she had never suspected. The puzzle pieces fell into place, one after the other, and the truth was finally revealed. The man's mask slipped off, revealing a familiar face, one that Sarah never expected. It was Detective James Owens, the very same officer who had been helping them all along. The man who had guided them through the investigation, the one they had trusted. The same person who had fed them false information and misdirected their efforts. Her mind raced. How had they not seen it? Owens had been hiding in plain sight, using his position of authority to manipulate every step of their investigation. And now, the true depth of the conspiracy was finally clear. Sarah could hardly speak. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" James Owens didn't hesitate. "Because I needed to control the narrative. I needed to make sure no one else could expose what we've been doing. The people I've been working with, they're the ones that matter. Not you. Not Pierce. And not anyone who's in our way." Emma gasped, horrified. "You were working with him all this time? You've been manipulating us? Using us?" Owen's gaze darkened, his eyes cold and calculating. "You were never meant to be more than pawns in my game. It's always been about control. I've been feeding you just enough information to keep you chasing the wrong leads while I worked in the background." Mark's hands tightened into fists. "This whole investigation, this whole fight, it's all been a lie?" James Owens smiled. It was a smile devoid of warmth. "Not a lie. Just carefully crafted deception. I've always been the one pulling the strings. Pierce, Victor, all of you were just part of the plan." Sarah's blood ran cold as she processed the gravity of his words. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than she had anticipated. Owens had been a constant presence in their investigation, offering guidance, support, and a sense of camaraderie. But now, she could see it all for what it truly was, a carefully executed trap. "Then it's over," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the shock she was feeling. "We know the truth now. And you're going to pay for everything you've done." Owens chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You think so? It's too late. You've been too deep for too long." Just then, an explosion rocked the building, sending everyone into a flurry of confusion. The walls trembled, and the sound of sirens in the distance grew louder. Owen's eyes widened in panic. What the hell? The building shook once more, this time more violently. It was clear that someone had taken action to stop Owens and his operation. But who? And why now, at the last possible moment? The masked men around Owens scrambled for cover as more explosions rang out. Sarah's mind raced. Whoever had planned this attack had timed it perfectly. They had just taken down the person who had orchestrated the entire conspiracy, and now they had to get out. "Run!" Sarah shouted to Emma and Mark. "We have to get out of here, now." But even as she said the words, Sarah knew it was too late. Owen's empire was crumbling, and there was nothing they could do to stop it now. With gunshots ringing in the distance and the building falling apart around them, Sarah, Emma, and Mark had no choice but to escape. They ran toward the nearest exit, their hearts pounding as the chaos unfolded in front of them. Behind them, Owen screamed in frustration, but they didn't stop to look back. As they made their way through the darkened hallways, Sarah's mind raced. What had just happened? Who had orchestrated this attack? And what did it mean for the future of their investigation? Who could have planned the attack on Owen's operation, and what does this mean for Sarah, Emma, and Mark? What shocking truths will emerge as the investigation continues? Leave your theories in the comments below. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.